met you, there was peace unknown. I set out to get you.
Kenny Rogers was a man who had seen the top of the mountain, the gambler, the man with the silver beard and the velvet voice who had taken country music to the masses. For years, Kenny's voice was everywhere, from jukeboxes and dusty roadside bars to television specials in primetime America. But in 1983, the fire was dying. His last few records hadn't hit. The ballads that once seemed unstoppable were slipping quietly through the charts, barely noticed. The man who once turned everything he touched into gold was now struggling to stay relevant in a music world that had moved on. The rumors spread fast. Some said he was too old for MTV. Others whispered that Kenny had become predictable, that he was safe, bland, past his prime. And behind closed doors, record executives were already looking toward younger names. For Kenny, every trip to the studio felt heavier. Every new song carried the pressure of proving he wasn't finished. And then there was Dolly. On stage, she was still dazzling. She smiled, she sparkled. But behind that smile was a battle she couldn't quite win. Dolly Parton had conquered country music long ago, but she wanted more. She wanted to be bigger than Nashville, bigger than the Opry. She wanted the world, and for a moment she had it, with Here You Come Again, with 9 to 5. She had crossed over, showing she could hang in the pop world as easily as she could in country. But by the early 80s, the gamble was slipping through her hands. Country fans thought she had abandoned them. Pop audiences weren't sure what to do with her twang, and music executives wondered if she had gone too far chasing Hollywood glamour. The whispers followed her everywhere. Dolly's lost her roots. Dolly's lost her way. In reality, Dolly was still a star, but she was a star without a clear direction, floating between two worlds, not fully embraced by either. Two icons, two legends, and yet both standing on the edge of decline. But here's where the story takes a twist no one could have predicted, because in 1983, their fates collided with three men the world thought were finished too, the Bee Gees. For a brief shining moment, Barry, Robin, and Maurice Gibb had been the biggest band in the world, the kings of disco, the voices of Stayin' Alive, Night Fever, and How Deep Is Your Love. But then came the backlash. July 1979, disco demolition, night in Chicago, a riot disguised as a baseball promotion. Disco records were burned in a baseball stadium while thousands cheered. And just like that, the Bee Gees went from adored to despised. Almost overnight, radio stopped playing them. Critics called them a joke. Fans who once screamed for them now pretended they had never cared at all. For the Bee Gees, it was exile. But here's the thing about the Bee Gees. They weren't just singers, they were songwriters. Some of the best the world has ever seen. And even if no one wanted to hear them anymore, the industry still wanted their songs. By the early 80s, the brothers had turned themselves into invisible hitmakers. They wrote for Diana Ross, for Barbra Streisand, for Dionne Warwick. Quietly, they were proving they didn't need the spotlight to change the charts. And then, they wrote a song that was never meant for Dolly Parton, never meant for Kenny Rogers, not even meant for country music at all. It was meant for Marvin Gaye. The Bee Gees called it Islands in the Stream, a smooth, soulful R&B ballad, a love song with silk edges. But Marvin never touched it. The song was shelved, forgotten, a lost island in the Bee Gees' endless sea of melodies. Until one day, Barry Gibb sat across from Kenny Rogers in a recording studio, searching for a miracle. Kenny was frustrated. Nothing was working. He was chasing that elusive comeback, but the spark just wasn't there. Producer after producer, track after track, everything sounded flat. And that's when Barry pulled out Islands in the Stream. The melody caught Kenny's ear immediately. There was something there, something different, something alive. But as the session went on, the same problem crept back in. It still wasn't enough. Kenny sang it. He tried it. But the energy wasn't right. The song was strong. Kenny was strong. But together, they weren't magic. And that's when fate, or maybe luck, or maybe something more, walked through the door. Because down the hall, in the very same studio complex, was Dolly Parton. Some say Barry begged her to join the session. Others claim Kenny didn't even know she was in the building until the moment she walked in. But what we do know is this: the second Dolly's voice joined Kenny's, the entire room shifted. Her soprano soared above his gravel, his warmth grounded her sparkle. The contrast was electric. It wasn't just a song anymore, it was a moment. For the first time in months, Kenny Rogers felt hope. For the first time in years, Dolly Parton felt the world lean closer, and Barry Gibb knew he had just witnessed history. The song the Bee Gees had written for Marvin Gaye was reborn. It was no longer soul, no longer disco, no longer pop. It was Kenny and Dolly, and Islands in the Stream was about to save them both. But here's the truth no one talks about. Before it became one of the biggest duets of all time, the song almost fell apart. Behind the microphones, behind the smiles, there were tensions, fears, and rumors that the whole project might collapse before the world ever heard a single note. You're watching RetroWaves, where the hidden struggles and untold stories of music's legends are brought back to life. If you're hooked already, hit subscribe, because the story of how the Bee Gees rescued Dolly and Kenny is only getting started. The microphones were on, the lights in the studio dimmed, and Kenny Rogers stared at the sheet of lyrics in front of him, knowing this song might be his last chance. But something wasn't right. From the very first takes, Kenny struggled. His voice, rich and weathered, couldn't quite find the groove Barry Gibb wanted. The phrasing felt off. The melody soared higher than Kenny's comfort zone. He was frustrated, tired, and desperate for a hit. He later admitted, "I was just about ready to give up on it." That's when Dolly walked in. Her entrance changed everything. Some witnesses say Barry rushed into the hallway to drag her inside. Others whispered Dolly had been listening the whole time, waiting for the right moment to step in. But the moment she entered that booth, the chemistry was undeniable. Kenny sang a line. Dolly answered. Her twang and sparkle lit up the song. His grit and soul grounded it. Suddenly, Islands in the Stream sounded alive. But the magic that listeners would one day hear on the record didn't come easy. Behind the glass, there were arguments. Barry wanted perfection. Kenny wanted to keep it raw. Dolly, never one to hold her tongue, wasn't afraid to speak up. One rumor even claimed that Dolly threatened to walk out mid-session when the takes dragged on too long. Some said she snapped back at Barry, insisting the song didn't need polishing, it needed heart. Whether true or not, what we know is this: the tension was real. And through it all, the Bee Gees worked like surgeons. Barry guided Kenny's phrasing line by line. Maurice adjusted the arrangements. Robin, quieter but sharp, sat back and listened, ready to tweak a lyric if the moment demanded. They weren't just producers, they weren't just writers, they were lifeguards, pulling Kenny and Dolly back from drowning careers and forcing them to swim in harmony. And slowly, painfully, it began to click. But Kenny still doubted. In later interviews, he confessed he wasn't sure the song would work at all. It was a struggle, he admitted. I didn't like it. I didn't think it sounded right. And he wasn't alone. Some executives thought it was too pop for country, too country for pop, a strange hybrid that didn't belong anywhere. It was almost shelved. Imagine that. One of the most famous duets in music history, almost never released. And yet, Barry Gibb refused to let it die. He fought for the song, he pushed Kenny, he begged Dolly to stay. He believed in Islands in the Stream, even when no one else did. Because Barry knew something the others didn't. He knew the power of voices that didn't quite fit together, because that's what the Bee Gees were. Three brothers with three different tones, finding harmony where none should exist. And when he heard Dolly's soprano crash into Kenny's baritone, Barry recognized it instantly. That imperfect collision, that's where the beauty was. But even as the recording wrapped, the doubts lingered. Would radio even play it? Would fans accept Dolly and Kenny together? Would the world still care? No one in that studio could have imagined what was coming, because when Islands in the Stream was finally released in August of 1983, the world didn't just accept it, the world embraced it. The song rocketed to #1, not just on the country charts, not just on the pop charts, not just on adult contemporary, on all of them. It became one of the rare songs in history to conquer every format, everywhere, all at once. Kenny Rogers, written off as finished, was suddenly back on top. Dolly Parton, caught between two worlds, had found the bridge that connected them. And the Bee Gees? They had proven that even when the world turned its back, they could still write the future of music. But behind the smiles, there were still questions, because the world saw Kenny and Dolly as perfect partners. But insiders whispered about a different story, about tension, about rivalries, about jealousy. Was it true? or just rumor. What we do know is this: Kenny and Dolly's friendship was real. Their chemistry was undeniable. But fame, pressure, and success always come with a price. And for Dolly and Kenny, the years that followed would prove that Islands in the Stream was both a blessing and a burden. When Islands in the Stream soared to #1 in 1983, the music world gasped. Kenny Rogers, the gambler who critics had written off as finished, was back at the top, his voice pouring out of radios everywhere. Overnight, the whispers of decline vanished. He wasn't fading anymore, he was leading again. Dolly Parton, who had stood stranded between two worlds, had finally found her bridge. With Kenny at her side, she belonged everywhere. Country couldn't deny her. Pop couldn't resist her. She was suddenly untouchable. And the Bee Gees, the brothers who had been mocked, banned, and buried after the death of disco, had proved the world wrong yet again. They didn't need to be in front of the microphone to dominate the charts. With one song, they had reclaimed their crown as the best songwriters alive. It was a redemption story, a resurrection, a miracle. But miracles always cast shadows. Because when two icons share one spotlight, people never stop asking, who's really in control? On stage, Kenny and Dolly looked like magic. They laughed, they teased, they leaned into each other as if they'd been destined to sing side by side. Audiences believed what they saw, that this was more than music, that this was love, and maybe that was the problem. The rumors began almost immediately. Tabloids hinted at secret late-night meetings, whispered about stolen glances. Fans swore they could see it in the way Kenny held Dolly's hand a second too long. The headlines were merciless. Dolly and Kenny, Nashville's secret affair, the duet that became too real. But both stars denied it. Again and again, Kenny insisted, "We were like brother and sister." Dolly laughed off the speculation. "We flirted, sure, but it was innocent. We never crossed that line." Still, the public never let go. To this day, some fans refuse to believe them. And then came the other kind of pressure. Because with a hit that big, Kenny and Dolly were no longer just themselves. They were a brand. Every promoter wanted them together. Every television special demanded the duet. Every fan expected to see them side by side. Kenny, who had built his career as a solo storyteller, the man of The Gambler and Lucille, suddenly felt tied to Dolly's shadow. Dolly, who had fought for years to be recognized as a crossover star in her own right, suddenly felt like half of a package deal. In private, insiders whispered that jealousy crept in, that Dolly sometimes resented the way people focused more on their romance than on her own artistry, that Kenny feared he'd never be seen as powerful without Dolly by his side. Were those whispers true, or just another round of gossip fed by the tabloids? We'll never fully know. But we do know this: the weight of Islands in the Stream never left them. Meanwhile, the Bee Gees sat quietly in the background, watching their creation dominate the charts. Barry Gibb later said it was one of the proudest moments of his career, not because it saved him, but because it saved Kenny and Dolly. The irony was staggering. The Bee Gees had been cast aside by radio, but their fingerprints were all over the decade's biggest records. Diana Ross, Dionne Warwick, Barbra Streisand, and now Kenny and Dolly. Everywhere you turned in the 1980s, the Bee Gees were still there. You just couldn't always see them. As the years passed, Islands in the Stream grew beyond a hit. It became a cultural monument. At weddings, couples swayed to it. At bars, jukeboxes spun it until the records wore down. In living rooms across America, people sang it badly but joyfully with their friends. And then, in 1998, a whole new generation discovered it in disguise, when Pras, Maya, and Old Dirty Bastard transformed it into Ghetto Superstar, a hip-hop anthem built on the bones of the Bee Gees' melody. Once again, the song refused to die, but as much as the world adored their partnership, the truth is Kenny and Dolly lived very different lives. Kenny married 5 times. Dolly remained devoted to her famously private husband, Carl Dean, who almost never appeared in public. Their worlds outside of music didn't match. And yet, every time they walked onto a stage together, the years melted away. The laughter returned. The teasing was still there. And the song, always the song, bound them together. Then came the moment that would make everything feel final: Nashville. Kenny Rogers' farewell concert, a night to celebrate a career of half a century. Stars came and went on stage, paying tribute to the man who had once gambled everything and won. And then, in the middle of it all, the lights dimmed. The crowd roared, and Dolly Parton walked out. They hugged, they joked, and then for the very last time, they sang Islands in the Stream. Kenny's voice, softer now, carried years of living. Dolly's tone, still bright, carried years of memory. Together, it was fragile, imperfect, but beautiful. When the song ended, Kenny turned to Dolly, pulled her close and whispered, "I will always love you." The crowd wept. Dolly wept. And even Kenny, who rarely let the world see him emotional, seemed to know the curtain was falling for good. 3 years later, Kenny Rogers was gone. For Dolly, singing the song has never been the same. Every note carries a ghost. Every word carries a shadow. She has said that when she sings it now, she doesn't just sing for herself. She sings for Kenny. She sings for the Bee Gees. She sings for the moment when all of them, 3 brothers, a gambler and a dreamer, came together and turned fading careers into forever. Because that's the truth of Islands in the Stream. It isn't just a love song. It isn't just a duet. It's a resurrection. A song that saved Kenny Rogers, a song that rescued Dolly Parton, and a song that proved the Bee Gees could never truly be erased. And maybe that's why, decades later, it still matters. Because in a business built on trends, on hype, on what's new and what's gone, Islands in the Stream reminds us that music can still be a miracle. One song, one moment, one collision of voices that should have never worked together but did. And through that song, 5 lives, Kenny, Dolly, Barry, Robin, and Maurice were bound forever. You've been watching RetroWaves, where the brightest lights and darkest shadows of music history come alive again. If you felt the magic of this story, hit subscribe, because every legend we uncover carries a secret waiting to be told.